Good morning, Charlotte County, and welcome to another episode of Libraries and History's Local History. Today we are beginning a series that I have entitled Charlotte County Through the Decades, and this is a special Centennial series that will highlight events, stories from Charlotte County's past over its entire centennial. And so part one today, we are going to do the 1920s. We're going to be talking about the Florida land boom. And then every month after will be a subsequent decade. So I hope you'll be tuning in for all of those. So let's jump right into the 1920s. Now, I know a lot of us out there, right, 1920s, flappers, speakeasies, these images are probably familiar to us. And in Florida, the 1920s is really associated with the Florida land boom. Now, this is not arguably the first land boom in Florida's history. If we think back to the late 19th century, when Florida really first opened up, you had major land purchase, Hamilton-Disston, in the 1880s. And this really kind of opens Florida up for land development. Henry Flagler, right, beginning in 1888 and even up through about 1904 or so, is really going to develop the east coast of Florida, and we're talking hotels, resort hotels in St. Augustine, and then stretching all the way down the coast, thanks in part to his railroad, the Florida East Coast Railroad. And so there is this precedent, right? And for Charlotte County, or what was then Charlotte County, because we're still DeSoto County at that point, that development is happening, right? You see, again, I've talked in past episodes about the various communities that sprung up in the vicinity of Charlotte Harbor, right? The town of Charlotte Harbor, Punta Gorda, places in Inglewood, right? We've talked about those in the past, but what happens in the 1920s is going to be a step beyond that. And so before we talk a little bit about Charlotte County, I want to just get you set here on what this is. And I'm going to be reading just a couple passages here from Bubble in the Sun by Christopher Knowlton. We have this book in the Charlotte County Library system. I would highly recommend it for anyone who is interested in this period. Absolutely fascinating and very well researched. So just to give you a sense of kind of the overview before we delve into what's going on in Charlotte County. So the Great Florida Land Boom would prompt the country's greatest migration of people, dwarfing every westward exodus as laid-off factory workers, failing farmers, disaffected office clerks, anyone unemployed or seeking a better quality of life, boarded southbound trains or climbed into their tin Lizzies, and we're talking cars here, and made their way to this emerging land of opportunity touted as a tropical paradise, right? And just to give you a sense of numbers here, because there have been land booms in the past, there have been the gold rushes, right? So it's not that there has not been mass migrations in American history prior to the 1920s, but what you see in 1920s Florida is really something spectacular and really something unique. In sheer numbers, the flow of people to Florida in the mid-1920s would exceed any of the great land rushes of the past. The 300,000 or so to California between 1848 to 1852, or the 50,000 to Oklahoma in 1889. By 1925, it would be conservatively estimated that 4,000 people were entering Florida daily by car, an additional 3,000 by train, and hundreds more by ship. In total, some 2.5 million people entered the state that year alone. According to one participant, it was like the possessive pilgrimage of army ants or the seasonal flight of myriads of blackbirds. Although the resident population reached 1.5 million by the end of the decade, this figure overlooks the enormous number of vacationers and seasonal or part-time residents, snowbirds, right, which we are all familiar with today, second home homeowners, or retirees who came and went regularly, to say nothing of the vast tide of people who would arrive strictly to invest in the land boom, right? So this just gives you a sense of what is going on here in the 1920s on the big scale. And I think that's important that we understand that and set the stage on that. And pardon me here, I just need to get down to my notes here. So what does this look like in Charlotte County? So remember, 2021, we're celebrating Charlotte County's Centennial. So one of the very big moments for Charlotte County is in fact the creation of Charlotte County in 1921. And this occurs kind of at the very beginning of what is typically understood as the boom period. In fact, 1920, 1921 were considered recession years in the United States. After World War I, right, there has been mass production and mass food production, industrial production during the war, and then after the war, things kind of stagnate, and you do see this recession. Now, Florida and Charlotte County are going to fare fairly well. In fact, from the evidence from looking at the Punta Gorda Herald, the major newspaper here in the area, in fact, the only newspaper in Charlotte County at the time, there's not really evidence that this recession was impacting the people here very much. There is talk about the potential for Florida and what is coming, right? So there really is a lot of optimism. 1922, right, when countrywide the recession has over and the boom is really going to start coming, the prosperity, you do see this. You see this change in the Punta Gorda Herald newspapers from 1920 to 1922, where it is evident that things are moving forward in a very positive way. Now, unfortunately, the 1921, 1923, 1924, and 1925 Punta Gorda Heralds no longer exist. And so I was not able to examine those to track this development. But what I can tell you is that from 1922, and looking at that newspaper, and then moving directly ahead to 1926, complete change, right? Arguably 1926, 1927 is the peak of the boom here in Charlotte County. And evidence is all over the place. We have numerous housing developments. We're talking places, and you know, we don't have time to go into where these all are and everything, but I'm just going to throw some names at you here. We've got Zoebelein, which should be somewhat known to some of you perhaps. We have Southland Heights. We have Riverside Park. We have Paloma Park. We have places that cater to the wealthy. The Hotel Punta Gorda, later the Hotel Charlotte Harbor. We have places that cater to the working man. We have places that cater to the middle class. And that really is something that makes the boom period here in Charlotte County different from, to some degree, what you see on the East Coast, right? Where we think of Miami Beach, and we think of Palm Beach, and we think of these posh hotels and resorts for the more well-to-do. And that's not to say that there was no place for the middle class in 1920s Miami or 1920s Palm Beach, but I think here you do see much more of a wider class percentage of people that are represented versus what you see on the East Coast. Now, if you give me one moment, bear with me here, and if we can find, here we go, perfect. And I just want to read the descriptions of some of these places for you, because I think it's just interesting how they promote them. So Zoebelein, 6 miles of sandy beach on the Myakka River. You have South Highlands, in a direct line between Punta Gorda and Fort Myers. Riverside Park, located near Cleveland on one of the highest points in Charlotte County, overlooking beautiful Shell River. So you can see here that this is promotion, right? And, you know, I think when we think of the 20s and we think of newspapers, media, and the ads that were put in the newspapers, Charlotte County is no different. I cannot even tell you how many ads I came across in these newspapers for these developments. And we're not talking small columns in the newspaper, we're talking front page headlines or full page ads. One was very interesting. It was actually a promotion for Venice and the development that was going on in Venice north of here. And it was a full 2-page spread talking about a new army invading Italy, and of course, right, Venice, Italy, and World War I, right? But now we're talking about retirees, we're talking about people coming to Florida for the weather, for the fishing, all of these things. But it's not just housing development in Charlotte County. And I think this, to some degree, is what sets it apart from the East Coast. We have civic improvement. Think about all the things around us today that we take for granted. The bridges over Charlotte Harbor, the Myakka River, right? The historic courthouse, the Tamiami Trail, or US 41. All of these things that are just a part of our everyday lives and we don't give it a second thought. They came about during the 1920s. This is a period when all of this crystallizes. So the first bridge across Charlotte Harbor was completed in 1921, although they're very quickly talking about how outdated it is and that they need to build another one. You have the completion of the bridge over the Myakka at El Zoebelein in 1927. You have the completion of the county courthouse in Punta Gorda in 1928. You have investment by the very famous Baron Collier, who was all things when it came to development, real estate, civic improvement. Collier not only buys the old Hotel Punta Gorda and turns it into the Hotel Charlotte Harbor, he is heavily invested in the railroad industry, even involving with the fishing industry in terms of the dock placements in Charlotte County. It is Baron Collier who helps make a lot of the funding or the improvements. He is the one that makes a lot of this happen. He is and it's not just Charlotte County, he's very invested in Southwest Florida generally. It is Baron Collier that helps get the Tamiami Trail back on track because construction of that begins in the 19-teens during World War I and stagnates for a very long time because of lack of funding. It's Baron Collier that gets that back on track, right? And you can bet that the people of Charlotte County want that trail to come through this county. They want it to come across their new bridge, right? And that was not always the design. So we take it for granted today, but there were other potential avenues for that road to go. But in fact, it does come through here. And the Tamiami Trail officially opens in 1928. So you're able to drive from Tampa to Miami in one stretch. And speaking of driving, automobiles, right? The 1920s, I know of course we think of Henry Ford, but we've got others out there too. Buick, Chevrolet, Dodge, all of these guys, right? And this is making these mass migrations possible, right? Yes, people are coming by train, as I read from the book, but the automobile is really what's driving this traffic. And so we really can't understate that. Agriculturally, we don't want to leave this out, and I know it sometimes gets lost. We think of all these civic improvements and the beautification of Charlotte County and Punta Gorda, but agriculture, right? Florida farmers, unlike farmers in the Midwest, fared very well during the 1920s. Why? Because they're focusing on fruit and dairy, right? Think about World War I, think about what would be needed overseas, right, because of the disruption of the war. And the answer there is grain, right? If you think about the bread baskets of Europe, that was all disrupted during World War I. Midwest farmers, no problem. Up production, great. But the war ends, Europe starts to recover, that grain industry begins to recover, and now Midwest farmers are left in the lurch. And you do see evidence of this, interestingly, in the Punta Gorda Herald. I found several, I don't know if it was a series, I don't know what it was, but you see these political cartoons, and they're addressing the plight of farmers, but they're not talking about Florida farmers. They're talking about farmers in the country generally, specifically those Midwest farmers who have so much surplus in the 1920s that they don't know what to do with it. Prices are so low. Right? It's a huge problem. And of course, this is going to be one of the reasons that the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl in the Midwest is so tragic and so disruptive for those farmers, right? That all begins in the 1920s. For Florida farmers, every week, or every month rather, there is a Florida Farm and Grove insert into the paper. and it is talking about citrus and talking about dairy, right? And oh, have you, what is the strawberry crop? What is the blueberry crop, right? Things are going very well for Florida farmers throughout this entire period. So if we think about Florida collectively, if we think about Charlotte County, right, 1926, 1927 specifically are very positive, full of growth, and full of possibilities. Interestingly, by 1928, there is some small evidence that this is changing. Now, I don't mean front page headlines saying that, doom and gloom, that the apocalypse is coming and prosperity is over, because you don't see that. But what you do see are subtle hints that while there is still progress, there is still advancement, it is not like the boom period. And they specifically use that terminology. And so it's clear that, 1926, 1927 specifically, and of course I don't have evidence from those other middle decades, so I don't know what was said then. But I can say that 1926-27 is very well represented, and there's clearly a lot of positivity. 1928, it's a little bit of a different tune, but still good things, right? Of course, the courthouse is completed in 1928. Plans for the new bridge, what becomes the Baron Collier Bridge, which will open in 1931, that's underway in 1928. So there is still progress, but it's not the same. And for Florida generally, especially East Coast Florida, right, which is mostly the subject of this book, the hurricanes of 1926 and 1928 are going to completely disrupt the boom. Arguably, for many parts of Florida, right, Miami Beach, Palm Beach, the boom is over with those hurricanes because they are so devastating and so destructive. So one of the things that we could say is that Florida begins to enter the early part of the Great Depression, or maybe a pre-Great Depression, sooner than the rest of the country, because of the mass speculation, because of the real estate boom and the development, and it had happened so rapidly, right? Again, think about Florida's population increasing by over 50% in only a few years, right? There's only so much that the economy can take, that society even can take. And I think it is important to remember when we talk about the Florida land boom and we talk about the 1920s in Florida, those folks that are coming down here, those folks that are investing and retiring and building, we're largely talking about white Americans here, right? African Americans in many cases are fleeing Florida and fleeing the South because of the racial discrimination of Jim Crow. And in Miami Beach and Palm Beach, while people are, relaxing by the side of the pool or by the ocean, they are being served by African American porters. And there's African American housekeepers who, and those people are not allowed to use the same facilities. They're not allowed to use those beaches, right? So I think it's important that we think of all the different layers of the Florida land boom on the East Coast, on the West Coast. Think about, the racial layers of it. It's a very, like the 1920s generally, it's not just all one thing. It's not just all flappers and illegal booze. I know it's a great image, and I know the Great Gatsby is a fantastic image, but the 1920s are so much more than that. And the land boom is so much more than that. So hopefully, I know this is a really short overview of this very transformative period in Florida history and Charlotte County history, but hopefully you've gleaned some important takeaways. Hopefully it'll spur you to do some research and do some digging. Again, we have Christopher Milton's book in the library system. The Punta Gorda Herald newspapers are available by appointment for research at Mid-County Regional Library, and I'm happy to assist with that if folks are interested, so you can look at these things for yourselves. And I do hope that you'll tune in next month where we dive into the 1930s. I can't promise we're going to talk all about the Great Depression, though that will certainly be a part of the conversation. So please tune in then. Please continue to follow us. And once again, Charlotte County, happy Centennial.